Now, the China angle on the virus. Susan, come in, please. Are we about to accuse China of stealing our vaccine research?
Well, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security could be on the verge of issuing a warning saying that China might be hacking into and working to steal American intellectual property when it comes to health information and the development of coronavirus vaccines. And this is according to reporting in the New York Times and also the Wall Street Journal. Apparently, the warning has not been finalized. It still may change. It may not be released. But we have heard from the Trump administration and the White House and also the State Department accusing China, first of all, of not notifying the world earlier on in terms of the spread and the development of coronavirus, and also repeatedly saying that China has stolen billions in terms of intellectual property each and every year, including sensitive information when it comes to biomedical research. And we know that there's been a serious deterioration, Stu, of the relationship between the two largest economies in the world. And that's pretty much the overhang that we've seen on the stock market the last few weeks.
It's true. Susan, thank you.
China is set to make good on the threat to use its economic clout to punish Australia by imposing an 80% tax on importing Australian barley. The already bad relationship between the nations worsened after our Prime Minister called for an independent inquiry into the origins of coronavirus.
China has fired another shot across Australia's bow.
We are deeply concerned by reports that China may impose duties upon our barley producers.
Beijing has given Canberra 10 days to explain why it shouldn't hit Australian barley with an 80% import tax.
There is no basis on which to believe that the Australian barley industry operates on anything other than a commercial footing.
Australia was China's biggest supplier of barley in 2017, but exports halved after 2018, when Beijing began a world trade claim that the grain was subsidised and so unfairly priced. It was seen here as a political shot at Australia for passing foreign interference laws and banning high-tech titan Huawei from the rollout of next-generation wireless.
This issue ought to be firmly decided on the merits of the case.
So, during its 18-month-long investigation, has any Chinese official visited Australia to find evidence that the government subsidises the barley industry?
No.
It comes on the heels of the Chinese ambassador's threat of economic retaliation if the Prime Minister persisted with his calls for an international inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus.
Maybe the ordinary people will see, why should we drink Australian wine, eat Australian beef?
Parliament returns this week and the government's under pressure to extend its wage subsidy and the doubling of unemployment benefits beyond the September deadline. Labor says the jobless will be left destitute and businesses will go broke if there is an abrupt end to the schemes.
I certainly don't believe the hard deadlines that are there right now are going to be able to continue.
The programs will be reviewed at the end of June. Chris Ullman, 9 News.
China's megacity Wuhan, where the novel coronavirus outbreak started, has reported its first cluster of infections since its lockdown was lifted. It stoked concerns about a wider resurgence of the disease. The new infections reported on Monday sounded a note of caution amid efforts to ease virus-related restrictions across China as businesses restart and people go back to work. Wuhan reported 5 new confirmed cases, all of whom live in the same residential compound. All the latest confirmed cases were previously classified as asymptomatic, people who test positive for the virus and are capable of infecting others, but do not show clinical signs such as a fever. The number of asymptomatic cases in China is not known. They only appear on the radar of health officials when they show up positive during tests conducted as part of contact tracing and health checks. But China does not include asymptomatic cases in its overall tally of confirmed cases until they exhibit signs of infection. There are currently 82,918 confirmed cases in China. The news comes after the northeastern city of Shulan imposed a lockdown on its 600,000 residents this weekend after a cluster of infections there.
We also have new information tonight that you heard John Roberts ask about the origins of the coronavirus. Multiple sources say this may be the costliest government cover-up of all time by China. The belief now, you heard the chairman of the Joint Chiefs asked about it, that the intelligence was inconclusive, but there is a growing belief that the COVID-19 virus originated in the Wuhan lab, not as a bioweapon, but as China's effort to find and deal with viruses to show the world China was as good as or better than the U.S. on that front. It's believed that the virus was bat to human, and then the human, patient zero, worked at the lab, went into the population in Wuhan, and the virus quickly spread from there. China, according to sources, moved quickly to shut down travel domestically from Wuhan to the rest of China, but did not immediately stop international flights from Wuhan. These sources say the World Health Organization was complicit from the beginning, helping China cover its tracks. And that is where we begin tonight. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off. Good evening, John. You asked about this reporting tonight, got something from the president, and obviously part of the reason why the president's coming down so hard on the WHO.
Yeah, there certainly has been a real change in tone from back in early February when the president described the WHO as some of the best and the brightest. Clearly, as this information begins to develop and is beginning to gain more traction now among U.S. officials, the president is changing his mind not only about the WHO, but about what happened in China. I asked him directly the information that you and I had discussed earlier today. He didn't really go down the road of a concrete answer, but he did suggest that he's looking at that, and that is becoming something that the federal government really wants to know a whole lot more about, Brett.
Obviously, China has pushed back about this line. The WHO came out publicly and said they were disappointed in the U.S. decision. But the president appears to be at least warming up to this line of thinking. And really, the origins of this virus become a big, big story if it all pans out, as these sources are saying.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And that's why I asked the president the follow-up, because he speaks to President Xi on many, many different occasions. He says he's got a great relationship with him. So I asked the president if in any of the conversations that he has had in recent months with President Xi, or even going back a couple of years, because there is this reporting, which we have confirmed now, that officials from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing visited this virology lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and were concerned enough about a lack of safety protocols there that they cabled back to the State Department that something should happen on this front to tighten up those security protocols. That's why I asked the president if he ever spoke to President Xi about that. The president said, I'm not going to tell you what I told President Xi or talked to him about in regard to the laboratory, but it does sort of indicate that there may have been a conversation there.
President Trump says China could have stopped the coronavirus from spreading to other countries. China's foreign ministry says claims that the virus escaped from a lab are, quote, fabricated out of nothing. Ben Tracy is at the White House. Ben, the president's view of the Chinese response has really changed significantly.
It sure has. You know, back in January and February, President Trump was praising China for doing a good job and for being transparent. He now says that was in part to get the trade deal done, and that it's possible that China intentionally allowed the coronavirus to spread. Now, here at the White House on Thursday, President Trump also said that he has seen credible evidence that the virus actually originated in a lab in Wuhan, China, but he gave no further details. Earlier Thursday, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said that it agrees with the scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified, but it is still investigating. Now, as the president lays blame on China, he is praising the efforts of himself and his administration. On Thursday, Vice President Mike Pence toured a ventilator factory in Indiana. He was notably wearing a mask after receiving backlash earlier this week for not wearing one when he was at the Mayo Clinic. Now, President Trump says that he has no problem wearing a mask when he travels to Arizona next week to tour a factory that's making medical supplies. The president is going to get out of the White House for the first time since late March. He's actually heading to Camp David for the weekend. Tony?
Ben, thank you very much.
Obviously, you are a veteran, to say the least, of markets and specifically credit markets and dealing with those credit markets. When you look at financial conditions as they stand right now, what type of effect are you seeing on your business, if at all?
I would say things are better than you're reporting. We've checked with all our bank lenders. Nobody's feeling like they're going to do anything stupid. Because the Fed lowered LIBOR rates and their cost of funds has hovered more or less constant. They have infinite access to capital. They're not going to cause this problem. The banks aren't really in tremendous duress. So, we're pretty comfortable with our credit exposure. I actually literally went through our investments this morning, all day yesterday. We'll continue after this meeting or after this interview. So, real estate in general is a slow process to adjust to conditions. But, we're facing World War III for 90 days. It's not World War III for 5 years or World War III for 10 years. It's going to be a 90-day gap. I appreciate everything on the earlier interviews where they said, get the money to the Americans who need it. You don't need a payroll tax cut. That assumes you had a job. People are going to get laid off by the tens of thousands, if not millions, for 3 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, but they'll be back at work as soon as we can rehire them. And what we ought to do is give each of those 20 million people in the service industries that are going to lose their jobs $5,000. It's $100 billion. We don't need to make these trillion-dollar facilities available to banks. We need to get the money to the people who are unemployed. So they should change their focus in Washington and focus on the tragedy that's unfolding in front of us. I am in Miami. They just announced they're closing the restaurants. Every mom and dad restaurant needs a life support. They need a little money to get through this little gap. It's going to be short, and it's going to pass.
Very.
So people are panicking, and it's kind of it's a shame.
So what of the other industries that are really struggling from this crisis right now? We had the airlines asking for more than $50 billion in aid, other people asking for packages towards other industries like travel and entertainment. What do you believe the Trump administration should do for industries outside of the airlines that are being impacted?
Again, let's focus on the hotel industry, which is one of the largest employers in the country, and maybe even retail in general. They employ something like 15 or 16 million people each. There's no choice for American Airlines or for Marriott or Hilton to lay off workers because there's no guests in the hotels, partly because the government shut them. So the money must go first to the individuals who can't afford to eat. They must eat. So the money should go directly to these people. And these discussion about a payroll tax cut is so stupid. It's $1 trillion, and you have to be employed to be a beneficiary of that. That's not the issue. The issue is the people that are unemployed or will become unemployed. So for me, I think the government needs to focus on real aid packages to the people that are most distressed. The industries themselves, the companies, if the banks behave themselves, the companies won't be under too much strain if we're talking about 90 to 120 days. And maybe they should turn the market off for 2 weeks and let us get through this. I mean, I'm hoping we're Korea and we're not France or Italy. Korea had 1,000 cases. In 30 days, they went from 2 cases to 1,000 cases to 76 cases or 67 cases. So they've gone in 30 days. And yesterday you heard the president say, I think erroneously, that this could last to August. I don't think this is an August issue. I'm not an expert, but I really think you have 60 days. And we'll be through a lot of this. And I really would say one other thing that is really important. Every day, though you don't talk about it too much, they're coming out with another drug that could potentially treat this. And I don't think in the history of the world have you ever had this many labs, this many people focused on a cure or a vaccine with technology that didn't even exist 10 years ago. So I am pretty optimistic that this long slide to oblivion that people are looking at is going to be shorter. And we have to like hold together and act as one, and we're going to be fine. But it's going to be painful. It is World War III for 90 days.